Welcome to Talking with the Translators. Our subject today is the professional bodies and the ways in which they support the translation profession, using the ITI, the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, as a case study. With me in the studio are Emma Wagner, the ITI Education Officer, and Sarah Griffin-Mason, who is relaunching her career as a translator in the UK. Welcome to you both.
Hello. Thank you.
Before we move into looking at what the ITI has to offer to translators, it would be interesting to hear a little about your own career background, because I think that's inevitably of intrinsic interest to our audience. Emma, when you talk to students and others, I often hear you refer to the ideal background for a translator, and I wonder if you'd be kind enough to just sketch that out briefly for us.
Well, this is actually not my own background. It's an outline that was produced by Lana Castellano, who's a very experienced member of ITI, a few years ago, and I'm not sure how serious she was, but it's quite a useful basis for discussing the various skills you need. And Lana described things like this, and this was in the proceedings of an ITI conference in 1988. She said, to start with, you need to have grandparents of different nationalities. Then a good school education, where you learn to write well in your mother tongue. After that, she suggests getting away from education for a bit, travel around the world, make friends, see life. Then go back to university and do your first degree, not necessarily in languages, perhaps in a technical or commercial field. Then, she says, spend the rest of your 20s and early 30s in the countries whose languages you speak, working in industry or commerce. Not yet translation, you see, but something else. Then, never marry into your own nationality, is the next requirement. Finally, after that, you're in your mid-30s by now, you can do a postgraduate translation course. And then, she suggests initially, after your postgraduate course, go into a staff job as a translator. And then finally, you're about 40 and you can start being a freelancer. So this is quite a long haul.
Some would be a bit disconcerted to learn that you're starting your career at the age of 40.
Yes, but this is something we see quite a lot, that people come to translation after a career elsewhere. It isn't, as I say, the pattern I followed. Yeah. I had a completely different pattern. I did a languages degree, a postgraduate course, and then I started working as a staff translator at the age of 23 and did it for 30 years. I haven't yet become a freelancer. I haven't quite reached that stage. Perhaps in my 60s I will do that.
And perhaps I could ask you, Sarah, how you relate to that career pathway that's just been
It does seem
outlined.
to be, it does seem to be a sort of general pattern. A lot of translators I know fit that pattern, and a lot of the elements also do relate to myself. I was brought up my early childhood in Brussels in the 70s, and we were surrounded by a lot of different languages, and in school we learnt a couple of languages. I then decided after my A-levels I didn't want to be a language teacher, so I gave up on languages for a while, but kept being drawn back, and I moved to Uruguay in my late 20s, and then I was drawn into translation there and got an in-house job there. And when I came back to Britain, I then progressed on to do a master's in translation and go freelance after that at the age exactly of 40.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So the message is quite clear. It takes time to become a professional. And yes. I think it's important to add this is not, of course, unique to translation as such. Yeah. I'd like to look briefly at the status of the translator in modern society and provoke you by saying that there is a notion that translators get an indifferent press at best and a poor one at worst. Could I perhaps start with you, Sarah, by asking what your take is on this?
In my experience, most people have no idea what a translator does. If you ask someone in the street or you say that you're a translator, they presume you're an interpreter, and they presume that what you do is you listen to one language, talk in another. Either that or they believe that you just type something from one language to another and that there isn't a lot more to it than that. And the public perception of a translator is what they will have seen in the films or on radio plays about interpreters who tend to behave rather unprofessionally, and really little more beyond that.
And Emma, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. It's partly because translators are meant to be invisible and we're rather self-effacing people. But the problem it leads to is that when people need to get hold of a translation by any means, because they need it for whatever, you know, they're buying a house in Spain and they need to have the documents translated, they have no idea how to go about it. They assume it can be done by a machine or maybe the au pair across the road. They don't realise there is such a thing as a professional translator. And when they discover it, they're often a bit shocked at how much it costs. But this is something we have to try. We have to try and do a bit of client education here.
I agree. I think there's still quite a bit to do in order to raise the status of the translator in many societies. If we look at recent developments, I think we see two. We see on the one hand a drive towards the lowering of costs, and one could argue that that is a further consequence of globalization. But at the same time, there are discernible moves towards improving the professionalism of the translator. And I wondered, Emma, if you could just give us an idea of some of the recent developments in this context.
Well, yes, there have been some very interesting developments in the past couple of years. At European level, we have the new standard on translation services, which is European-wide, so applicable in all the countries of the European Union. And in Britain, it's implemented as British Standard EN 15038. And the big advantage of this, I can't give a full account of it here, but the big advantage is that it defines various kinds of translation service, such as proofreading, revision, reviewing, and gives an idea of how to go about getting a translation if quality is very important. So, for example, it specifies that to meet the standard, a translation has to be revised, that is, looked at by a second person who can correct it and improve it. And the other thing, that's the European level. It's very recent. It was introduced in 2006. We're still waiting for it to filter through into the market, but it has the merit that it exists. And the other thing, very important in the UK, is that the Institute of Linguists now has a royal charter, it calls itself the Chartered Institute of Linguists, and is able to issue individual charters to chartered translators, chartered interpreters. Just as in Britain people are familiar with the concept of a chartered accountant or a chartered surveyor, you can now have a chartered linguist to do your translations or your interpreting for you. So that's been a real boost for the profession. And
do you think there's evidence to suggest that these are having an impact?
Well, I think it's far too soon to say, quite frankly. These are things that happened in the last couple of years.
Sure. So those are some external frameworks that translators are beginning to take account of. But there are, of course, internal frameworks that you as a professional inevitably sign up to. So we're talking about quality filters here, I guess, and I wondered, as a translator, Sarah, what quality filters you apply to yourself as an active translator?
Right, well, I've seen some very bad translations done, and I think to do a good translation you do need a certain level of education, degree level I would say, to achieve the amount of writing clarity that you need. I then of course have done an MA in translation because I felt that if I was going to have to argue my point with clients and make them realise that what I'd done was good, I had to know what I was talking about. So I did my MA in translation. Also, I've worked in-house with my work being revised for 6 or 7 years. I currently work for some clients on a basis where my work is reviewed by someone with better knowledge than myself after I've done it, because to charge a professional rate, you need to produce a professional service. And of course, I'm a member of the ITI, which is a professional body.
To which we now turn. So perhaps I could start by asking you, Emma, just to outline the key provision, the key support mechanisms which the ITI offers to translators and interpreters.
Well, it's difficult to know where to start, but if you'd like me to mention just a few things, I think one of the most important things that ITI offers is the ITI Bulletin, our journal, which comes out every 2 months and is issued to all members. Then the ITI office provides support of all kinds to members. And ITI has regional and subject networks, which mean that translators in the same area can meet up and network with each other. And plenty of training events as education officer. I should have put that first, I suppose. A lot of ITI training and continuing professional development. And last but not least, certainly not least, is our website, because the website gives access to all those things I've mentioned, information on the training provision, fact sheets, the sort of support the office can provide. Plus, of course, very important feature is our directory. A directory is a list of all the qualified members of ITI, searchable by anyone who's looking for a translator or interpreter. So if somebody wants to find, say, somebody to translate their Spanish documents into English in the field of law, they can go into the directory. It's free of charge to the public. They can type in Spanish into English law, and they will get a list of ITI members who can do that job for them, and then contact them. So this does provide work for it. It's a service to the public, helping them to find translators and interpreters, of course. But it's also a source of work for our members. A lot of them get most of their referrals through the ITI directory.
And how do you actually get your name onto that directory?
Well, you have to become a qualified member of ITI, because we have to ensure that the people on that list can meet a certain standard. And that means you have to pass the entrance exam or assessment to become a member of ITI. You have to have a certain amount of experience in order to be allowed to take the exam, 3 years full-time experience.
So are you vetted by a committee?
In effect, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's looking at the ITI from the perspective of a client. But you, Sarah, I imagine, are looking at the ITI through the eyes of, as a translator. So what particular items are there on the website which you find useful?
Well, I first came across the website while I was still living in Uruguay, and I was operating very much in isolation from the translation world over here. And I found it very, very informative on giving me an idea of what was going on in the profession as a whole. It also has a lot of downloadable articles and information about how to get started as a professional translator, advice on what sort of qualifications, what sort of standards you need to achieve in order to progress. It gives information on training and translation events, language events that are coming up. It's just a generally good resource.
Yeah. Can I come back to training and events? It would be perhaps useful to hear a few examples of training events you participated in, and what benefit you feel has accrued from that.
Yeah, well, there's always an issue in translating about the difference between revising and reviewing translations, and the ITI offers short courses, day courses on the difference between the processes and how to do it properly. The most recent workshop I went to was one run called Style Matters, which was about upping your game, basically, how to improve your client base and produce better translations and get better clients, run by Chris Durbin in London. And that was very informative on how to market yourself, how to make yourself appear more professional to the people who are paying for your services. But there's a great variety of training offered. I also went to a course on how to use Tradeoffs, basic, how to set it up and get it going, which is quite hard to work out when you're not particularly technically competent.
And do you find that you're able to input yourself in the sense, or do you feel that these are items which are on offer to you, or are you able to determine what the ITI might offer to you as a translator?
The ITI is always open to suggestions. There's always a part on the bottom of the form. How could this training be improved? What other training would you like to be offered? There is an issue that quite often people don't know what training they want to be offered, but you have room to comment and to suggest. Yes.
Another important aspect, and perhaps particularly for translators who plough their lonely furrow, is peer support and networking.
Yes.
Psychologically necessary and potentially very, very useful.
Yes.
What does the ITI offer specifically in this regard?
The thing that particularly helped me when I was getting started after I'd finished my MA was, at the time it was called the Peer Support Group, which was a course basically over 3 months run by established good quality translators, ITI members, who acted as mentors and helped you as a starter to arrange your CV, to market yourself, to set up your office. They advised you on every aspect of working as a freelance translator, what you needed in terms of insurance, in terms of technology, in terms of advice on how to even keep your accounts. It covered all the central core aspects of that. I believe it's now called the Professional Support Group, and it offers a slightly different course that is aimed at setting up your freelance business. And the part that was sort of guidance has been set up as a separate course called the Orientation course, which is for when you've really just finished your MA and you're looking how to get your experience, your first experience in the business.
And are you in contact with people that you've met, for example, in these situations? Yeah, so that is a reality beyond the actual course that you take or the event that you attend.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I moved back from Uruguay, I knew nobody in the translation world here. And I now feel that I know a good core of very professional people who I can turn to for advice or support.
Okay. Can I turn to you, Emma, and ask about the ITI office? You mentioned that in your brief resume earlier. I contact the ITI office. What can I expect to perhaps be helped with?
Well, the typical situation where a translator would contact the ITI office or an interpreter is if they have a problem over a contract. Well, not being paid is the biggest problem. So you can get support on things like that, information about how to make sure you get paid, advice on contracts, if contract terms are fair or not, information that we've managed to collect by helping other translators. Obviously, you know, it has a snowball effect. You can help people with their problems that way. ITI also has an arrangement to provide a 24-hour legal helpline, which is confidential. It's not provided by the office staff themselves, it's a separate company. But this is provided free of charge to ITI members. And you can phone the legal helpline at any time with any problem, not necessarily translation related.
So there's clearly a lot on offer. I think the conversation has established that. So there's a chance before we move to a conclusion to perhaps identify any things that we may not have covered in our conversation today.
Perhaps the fact that if you join ITI as an associate, as a student, you get a discounted rate, and it gives you a sort of main line into the good professional conduct and good professional contacts. So it's a very useful point.
Anything to add?
I'd like to mention the bulletin in a bit more detail. This is a very lively publication. It's not your standard academic journal, though we do have a couple of academic articles in it every month. But it's a really good read for a translator and for interpreters too. There's a lot of professional news in there, and also adverts for jobs, software reviews, discussions. So this is a real perk of membership.
Right, okay. Well, thank you both very much. It's been, very constructive. I think we've learnt that the ITI and the Chartered Institute of Linguists have a lot to offer to translators. And indeed, I think that if you want to become a professional, it's a must that you do, in fact, join one of the, or if not both of the professional bodies. And I think for me, a second message is the importance of networking, that joining the professional bodies allows you to embrace the world of translation in a wider sense and to make new friends, both socially and professionally. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.